Ah!
How did he? What the?
Wow, Alex showed up in the middle of this interview.
That's a beautiful thing.
Technology. He landed like he materialized.
Can we say I teleported?
Yeah.
Manifested.
Oh, can I like do the Dragon Ball Z? Came out of nowhere.
That's it.
Solid.
Yeah.
So we are in a little episodic chat about our code initiative, which was what came out of a 2019 church-wide evaluation. And the four big principles we came out of with were COACH, C for community, O for outreach, A for accountability, T for transcendence. So let's talk about outreach and why, like what came out of the evaluation process that made us, because we're an outreach church.
Yeah.
We were an outreach church in 1995. That's why we started a church.
Right.
Why would we need to emphasize that?
Right, like so. In a lot of these, like they seem to like they reflect on some sort of failing or an area where we really needed to improve. And ironically, what the diagnostic found was that we are twice as effective as measured by at evangelism as measured by the number of people who say they weren't Christians when they started coming to the church and the number of people who are now Christians. And the number's still low, so no church is doing great. But it was like the difference between a 4.5% versus a 9%. So, but nevertheless, I think this is one of those things where we found that the culture was, those cultural realities were something AC3 cannot escape, and that is that if we're going to put a lot of our eggs in an invitational basket, that we were running up against a culture that was no longer having its problem with Christianity just be, well, your services are boring.
Right, because that was a huge part of why we did what we
did. And the seeker movement overall, which we were a deep part of. So the seeker movement was basically saying, "Hey, listen, what's the big roadblock in your irreligious person coming to faith?" Well, he probably had the same moral framework as you, because he lived in America. He probably had at least a working knowledge of Christianity, and he just found the church was boring and irrelevant, and they asked for money too much, and they wore bad suits. And so let's just change all those things.
Those are changeable.
And so then, and I'm not to be trite about it, but like that if they're continued to be open to an invitation to church, but they found the church to be suddenly relevant, suddenly they were playing hip music, and suddenly the preacher talked like he was a person, and not
what?
Like right, and
crazy.
Then massive change happened, and massive change did happen, but the culture continued to move, and it continued to move post-Christian. So we were there saying, here we are trying to create an outreach church with an environment where people are less and less likely to accept an invitation to church because of their ideological roadblocks as much as their stylistic roadblocks. So the stylistic roadblocks still there, like full on. But now the ideological roadblocks are getting there bigger and bigger and bigger. So, for example, like I think there's a lot of our neighbors wonder if it's even a moral choice to become a Christian. That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Like it would be immoral for me to become a Christian because then I would be hateful, intolerant, bigoted, and bad.
That's so common in our youth group right now. There's just so much in our youth ministry that this identity that Christians are some sort of enemy.
Right.
And
as opposed to like the 80s and 90s, which was, I should become a Christian, but that's goody two-shoes, and I don't want to do that. Well, that's totally different.
Yeah.
Like if you got a 16-year-old that says, I want to be a good person, but I couldn't be a Christian then because they're like hateful and bad people.
Yeah.
So that's a completely different mentality. So outreach
has got to look different.
It's got to look different. We got to put eggs now in what's happening outside the building. So if we have to put it in a nutshell, that's what the evaluation told us. We have to start putting more eggs in what's happening outside the building. We still want to be this place that surprises people inside the building with our relevance, with our creativity, with the fact that we can speak to you. We've been where you've been.
We're authentic.
That's a big part of our identity and DNA. But we now have to take a lot of this and ship it off-site in some sense. And I say that, put that in quotation marks, because some outreach things we'll do in the building, but just won't be a service. It won't just be like a worship service.
For example, we had a blood drive here in December. Where we had Northwest Blood
Bank.
Blood Bank. We just hosted them here.
Yeah.
And so that was just something that we could do to reach out to our community, because that's a real need in this. And we could do that. So that was an outreach. Had nothing to do
we offered
with the church service.
ACE classes during the pandemic. You had parents had children at home because they were not in school and they were going stir crazy. Well, you know what we could do? We could take your kids off your hands for an hour and a half.
We can
and
teach
we can teach them something.
rock music and some painting
Yeah,
skills
art
and
classes
have a little
robotics.
PE class and a
It was-
robotics class.
That's a way of
Sure.
blessing the community.
So that's a different kind of outreach.
Is that where the Iron Man suit came from?
That's my
Yes.
Iron Man suit. Don't touch it again.
Yeah.
So that was that's an example of doing outreach differently.
Yes.
Right. But it also goes back to, remember, we're kind of compressing a lot of different inputs into 4 initiatives. So even the e-group initiative
Mhm.
was about outreach, because we
Good.
realized that
Yeah.
rather than drawing people into one, you can think about it in almost architecturally. Rather than inviting people into one large building
Mm.
on a Sunday morning, we need to take our people and put them out
Mm-hmm.
in these smaller places
That's
where
good.
other people can connect. And so that's why we're developing e-group missions, where there are
Yeah,
ways that
that's
they can
good.
connect, right?
Yeah.
That sort of a thing. How is outreach, since you've come in, you're the new kid on the block, right? So how are you looking at, for instance, in youth ministry, how is outreach different these days because it's a big value?
Well, obviously, you guys had this initiative as you were interviewing me, so this is a huge part of why I even joined the team. But outreach to me has always been about meeting people where they are, right? Because that's what Jesus did. He did. He was in the temple sometimes,
Yeah.
but most of the time he was just yelling at the Pharisees. So he went to where people are, and the same thing with youth ministry. Like, what we're thinking through is, how do we meet students where they are right now? In their circles. If we were in the 50s or the 60s, maybe we would have went to a milkshake diner and, we would have met them there, right? But where are they now? They're online. They're in digital space.
Right.
And so how do we get them from that digital space to being in person? We do things like lock-ins, where we say, "Hey, come play video game tournaments with us. We're gonna just engage with you." Maybe we'll say, "Hey, go to the creamery. We'll buy you a drink." Like these are things we're thinking about. Not even saying Jesus at all, really. We just kind of say, "Hey, we're Christian, and maybe we're not that scary,
Yeah.
and maybe we're able to have a conversation." And the hope is, eventually, that through relationship, we show them who Jesus is.
Yeah.
So outreach at Allen Creek, our second big value of 4, and already we know through community and through outreach a way you can engage through that. Both of them, same time. Check out an e-group
Yes.
here at AC3.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep.
Please join an e-group.
Yep.
Please.